I always felt that my sister and I lived in two separate worlds, even under the same roof. From early on, our parents seemed to view her life through a lens of limitless possibilities, while mine was framed by quiet indifference. Small favors here and there grew into clear distinctions, but nothing prepared me for what happened the summer I turned 25. My parents had invited us home, claiming they had exciting news. As we sat down in our family living room, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Perhaps, after years of subtle disappointments, things might finally even out. But that hope faded quickly. My sister, who had recently graduated and was about to marry into a wealthy family, was handed the keys to a beautiful new home, the kind of house she'd always dreamed of. I watched the happiness spread across her face, her future solidified in that single gesture. Then it was my turn. My parents handed me a box, a dusty old cleaning set they'd found in storage. They joked lightly about me always being good at fixing things up, and said perhaps I could find some use for it. It wasn't intended as cruelty, but the hurt was deep and instant. At that moment, the gap between us had never felt wider. But even through the humiliation, a quiet determination took root inside me. If this was how they saw me, as someone capable only of cleaning up messes, I'd show them exactly how well I could do just that. That night, as I sat alone in my cramped apartment staring at that old cleaning set, the bitterness washed over me in waves. Every hurt I'd brushed off in the past came surging back with unbearable clarity. The birthdays forgotten, the achievements unnoticed, the quiet humiliation I'd buried beneath forced smiles. It all returned, raw and relentless. The mop handle felt rough in my hands, a painful reminder of what my parents truly thought of me. Anger surged through my chest, tightening my breath, burning in my throat. Was this really what I deserved after years of trying to earn their approval? After all those nights spent awake, pushing myself harder, trying to prove I was worthy of the same pride they showed my sister? I knew crying wouldn't change anything, yet tears blurred my vision. But beneath that sadness, something else was emerging. An intense, burning desire not only to prove them wrong, but to reshape my story entirely. If my parents thought this was all I amounted to, they'd soon realize just how mistaken they were. That cleaning set became more than an insult. It became a symbol of what needed cleaning in my life. The unfairness, the disrespect, and the quiet acceptance of less than. I decided right then, sitting alone in my apartment, that I would no longer wait for recognition. I would take it, even if it meant tearing apart everything my family believed about me. My parents and sister had unknowingly ignited a fire that would burn away every last trace of their disregard. And when the smoke finally cleared, they'd find out exactly what happens when you underestimate someone with nothing left to lose. I woke up the next morning feeling hollow, an emptiness gnawing at my insides like never before. Sleep had barely touched me, and even the early sunlight pouring through my faded curtains couldn't chase away the shadows in my heart. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw my sister's delighted face, my parents' proud smiles, and my own reflection mirrored in their eyes. Small, insignificant, easily forgotten. Dragging myself out of bed, I glanced again at the box in the corner. The old cleaning set now mocked me from afar, like a silent judge passing verdict. My apartment suddenly felt smaller than ever, the faded wallpaper peeling, the old carpet fraying at the edges. Everything around me screamed mediocrity. And now, my family had officially confirmed that's exactly what they saw in me. I knew I couldn't stay home, drowning in my bitterness. Forcing myself to leave the suffocating space, I wandered the neighborhood aimlessly, hoping fresh air would clear my mind. But everywhere I turned, I was haunted by reminders of my sister's success. Every beautiful home seemed a cruel echo of the one she had effortlessly been handed. Every laughing family felt like salt in my wounds. proof of the warmth and belonging that seemed forever out of my reach. Eventually, I found myself sitting on a bench in the quiet corner of a local park. Leaves rustled softly around me, the silence amplifying my thoughts. In those lonely moments, I confronted something I'd spent my life avoiding: the harsh truth that I'd always been secondary. My parents had showered my sister with affection and opportunities, and I'd been content to live off the scraps, grateful for any fleeting attention they offered. But now, seeing the stark injustice of their latest gesture, I realized I had lost myself somewhere along the way. Yet amidst that pain, something hardened inside me, an icy resolve crystallizing from the chaos. I couldn't change my family's hearts, couldn't rewrite their biases, but I could alter my own path. I could rebuild myself stronger than ever, redefine my worth beyond their narrow perceptions. My parents had underestimated me for too long, and I decided that today marked the end of their quiet dominance over my life. If they wouldn't give me the respect I deserved, I'd take it by force. No longer the overlooked child seeking approval, I would become someone they simply could not ignore. The next few weeks blurred into a focused determination, unlike anything I'd experienced before. Every waking hour became devoted to reinventing myself, driven by a desperate need to prove them wrong, to turn their mockery into regret. I poured my entire being into my work at the nonprofit, taking on projects nobody else dared, volunteering for tasks that required long nights and impossible deadlines. But that wasn't enough. The anger fueling my transformation demanded more, pushing me to seek out opportunities I'd never previously considered. Nights that once passed quietly were now filled with study, strategizing, networking. I reached out to connections I had long neglected, seizing chances to expand my influence, my skills, my presence. With every day that passed, I shed more of my old self, emerging slowly as someone entirely new. Yet even as I threw myself into these exhausting days, my parents remained oblivious. The occasional phone calls with them were shallow and brief, dominated by updates on my sister's dream home, her engagement parties, her lavish future. Each conversation sharpened the knife twisting in my heart, yet I forced smiles into my voice, promising myself the sweet moment of revenge would be worth it. One evening, late at night, after returning home drained but invigorated by another grueling but successful day, my phone rang. It was my sister. I hesitated before answering, bracing myself. Her voice poured through the receiver, excited, self-centered, blind to my hidden pain. She invited me to visit her new home, to admire the luxurious furnishings and extravagant decor, seemingly unaware of how much this would hurt me. Against my better judgment, I accepted the invitation. The thought of walking through the symbol of my humiliation, the monument to my family's favoritism, made my stomach twist. But it also filled me with resolve. I needed to see firsthand what had been denied to me, to engrave every detail into my memory. Because in my heart, a new plan was forming. One that would ensure my family's pride and ignorance would finally crumble at my feet. The day of the visit arrived swiftly. I stood at the entrance to her sprawling home, heart racing painfully inside my chest, bitterness and resolve battling beneath my calm exterior. My sister greeted me warmly, oblivious to my turmoil, her face glowing with pride. As she led me through room after lavish room, her cheerful voice detailing every opulent feature, I felt my resolve intensifying with each step. This luxury, this acceptance and pride she'd received effortlessly, it would not go unchallenged. And as I stood there, in the center of my sister's dream home, a house that symbolized all the love and approval my parents never saw fit to give me, I finally made peace with the path I had chosen. I would not merely survive in my family's shadow. Instead, I'd rise above them completely, ensuring their realization of my worth would come at the precise moment they least expected. and in a way they'd never forget. As I left my sister's home that day, every elegant corner and finely crafted piece of decor sharpened my focus. The disparity between us had never been clearer, but rather than bow to the weight of injustice, I used it as fuel. The drive home was a quiet one, filled with contemplative silence and an ironclad resolve. I had seen the life they chose to give her, and now, more than ever, I was determined to carve out my own, far surpassing anything they had ever envisioned for me. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. My days were consumed with efforts to transform every aspect of my existence. I expanded my network aggressively, connecting with influential figures in the nonprofit sector and beyond, seeking advice, partnerships, and opportunities. Each connection was a step further from my old life, each successful project a testament to my growing capabilities and resilience. My hard work began to pay off in ways I had only dared to dream. I was invited to speak at major conferences, my opinions and insights gaining weight and respect in the community. Articles about my initiatives started appearing in local and even national news outlets, painting me as a rising star in social advocacy. With each accolade, my confidence grew, but more importantly, my visibility increased. A visibility that soon became impossible for my family to ignore. It was during one of these conferences, while I was on stage delivering a speech on systemic inequalities in housing and education, that I noticed them. My parents, sitting inconspicuously in the back of the room. Their presence was a shock, their faces a mix of surprise and something akin to awe. They had come, perhaps out of curiosity, or perhaps because the growing murmurs of my successes had finally become too loud to overlook. After the applause had died down and the crowd dispersed, they approached me. Their congratulations were tinged with a hesitancy, a dawning realization of the magnitude of what I had achieved on my own. The encounter was brief, their words awkward and unsure. They were no longer speaking to the daughter they thought they knew, but to a woman who had redefined herself in spite of them. The conversation was a turning point. For the first time, I saw something like respect flicker in their eyes. It was gratifying, yet painfully late. The drive home that night was different from any before. I felt a complex mix of victory and sorrow. Yes, I had begun to earn their recognition, but the journey there had laid bare the depths of their initial disregard. With my family's newfound awareness came a subtle shift in our dynamics. Phone calls became more frequent, their tones more respectful. My sister, too, began to reach out more, her curiosity about my life and work evident in her questions. Yet, beneath their interest, I sensed their unease. They were beginning to understand the full extent of what their indifference had pushed me to become. As I prepared for the next chapter of my journey, I knew that the hardest part was not just achieving success, but deciding how to handle their late blooming acknowledgement. Would I let them back into my life, now that they saw my worth? Or would their past neglect forever color our future? Each step forward was now laden with these questions, but one thing was clear. I had shattered the mold they had cast for me. My life was mine to shape, and no matter what the future held with them, I had proven to myself and the world that I was not someone to be underestimated. With my achievements stacking up, my life took on a new rhythm, one of relentless progress and subtle vindication. I no longer sought my family's approval. Instead, I focused on the broader impact of my work. My initiatives were not just about personal success. They were about creating meaningful change. This clarity pushed me to take even bolder steps, challenging existing structures more fiercely than ever before. I spearheaded a campaign that tackled the housing crisis head-on, partnering with local governments and private entities to provide affordable, sustainable housing solutions. The project garnered widespread attention, drawing investors and policymakers into a conversation that was long overdue. My name became synonymous with transformative social change, and with each successful project, my reputation as a leader in the field solidified. It was during the launch of this housing initiative that I felt the full weight of my transformation. Standing in front of a crowd of eager participants and media, I announced the plans for a new community center that would not only provide homes, but also education and employment opportunities. The applause was loud, the support overwhelming, and in that moment, I realized just how far I'd come. My family's responses shifted noticeably. Their calls and messages, once perfunctory, were now filled with genuine interest and, occasionally, awe. My sister, particularly, seemed to grapple with the reality of my accomplishments. She began attending some of my public events, watching from the sidelines as I led discussions and panels. However, the newfound respect from my family was a double-edged sword. It was satisfying to finally be seen as an equal, yet there was a part of me that couldn't forget the years of indifference that had fueled my ascent. The scars from that neglect remained, a reminder of the loneliness of my journey. One evening, as I reviewed project documents in my new, airy office, a stark contrast to my once cluttered apartment, my sister called. She wanted to discuss something important. Her voice was hesitant over the phone, a stark departure from her usual confidence. Curious, I agreed to meet her for coffee the following day. We met at a quaint cafe, away from the usual bustle of my public life. As she sat across from me, fidgeting with her cup, I braced myself for what was to come. She began by expressing her pride in what I'd accomplished, her words sincere. But then she paused, taking a deep breath before diving into the real reason for our meeting. "I've been thinking a lot about our family," she started, her gaze steady. "About how things were, and how they are now. I can't change the past, but I want to understand it, understand you better. Can we start again? As equals?" Her request was simple yet profound. It was an invitation to reconcile, not just as siblings, but as two adults who had lived very different lives under the same roof. The conversation that followed was long and sometimes painful, filled with admissions and apologies. But it was also cathartic, opening a door to a possible new beginning. As I left the cafe that afternoon, the sun setting behind the city skyline, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The path forward was not going to be easy or straightforward, but it was a path worth exploring. My family's recognition had come late, but it opened up new possibilities for healing and understanding. In the weeks that followed our conversation, the dynamic within our family subtly changed. My sister and I started rebuilding our relationship with cautious optimism, meeting regularly to share more about our lives. These weren't just casual updates, but deep, meaningful exchanges that had been absent for years. Our parents, observing this change, began altering their approach as well. Their conversations with me shifted from superficial pride in my achievements to a more thoughtful engagement with my work and its impact. This evolving family dynamic was not without its challenges. Old habits and attitudes occasionally surfaced, reminding us of the barriers we still needed to overcome. However, the effort was mutual and consistent, marking a genuine attempt at reconciliation and understanding. Meanwhile, my professional life continued to escalate. The housing initiative had taken off, generating not only local, but national interest. I was invited to discuss the project on major platforms, which further established my authority in the field. Each public appearance and interview I gave reinforced the new narrative of my life, one of influence and innovation, far removed from the underestimated figure I had once been. It was during one of these interviews, broadcasted live on a well-known news channel, that I openly discussed the personal challenges that had fueled my ambition. I shared how the disparity in treatment between my sister and me had pushed me to prove my worth independently. The interview resonated with many, drawing support and admiration from a broad audience. People from similar backgrounds reached out, sharing their stories and expressing how my journey had inspired them. The public acknowledgement of my struggles and subsequent rise added another layer to my family's understanding of me. It wasn't just about acknowledging my professional success, but recognizing the emotional and psychological journey I had endured. This public validation seemed to finally trigger a deeper, more profound respect from my parents. They began to see not just the outcomes of my efforts, but the resilience and determination that had driven them. As the months passed, the lines of communication that had once been strained and superficial in our family grew more open and sincere. My sister and I developed a friendship that was based on mutual respect and shared experiences, rather than the competitive tension that had once defined our relationship. One crisp autumn evening, as I stood on the balcony of my new apartment overlooking the city, I reflected on the changes the past year had brought. The view from here was starkly different from my old, cramped apartment. It wasn't just the physical elevation, but the emotional and psychological growth that had brought me here. I realized that my family's late recognition, while initially a source of pain, had become a catalyst for a more authentic connection. I had reached a point where the need to prove myself was no longer driven by a desire to win my family's approval, but by the broader impact of my work. The recognition I had once craved had transformed into a recognition I now controlled and defined on my terms. The autumn turned into winter, and with the change of seasons came further consolidation of my professional and personal growth. The housing initiative had become a benchmark for sustainable development, sparking similar projects in other regions. My role had evolved beyond being just a project leader. I was now a consultant and a key speaker, influencing policy and inspiring change on a national scale. This elevated status brought new opportunities and challenges. While the recognition was fulfilling, it also meant my responsibilities increased. My days were filled with strategy meetings, interviews, and planning sessions for new initiatives. Despite the hectic schedule, the satisfaction of seeing tangible improvements in people's lives fueled my drive. In the midst of this whirlwind of activity, my parents invited me to their home for a holiday dinner. It was an annual tradition, but this year felt markedly different. As I entered the house, I could sense the shift in dynamics. There was an air of respect, a recognition of my contributions that was palpable. This wasn't just a familial obligation, it was a celebration of achievements, mine and theirs. During the dinner, my father made a toast. His words were uncharacteristically reflective. "We are here tonight, not just to celebrate the holiday, but to honor someone who has taught us about strength and perseverance. You've shown us that true success comes from facing challenges head-on and transforming them into opportunities. You've not only changed your own life, but have touched the lives of countless others." The acknowledgement from my father, whose approval had once seemed an unattainable dream, was a profound moment. It wasn't just the words, but the sincerity behind them. My mother, too, expressed her pride and affection in a more open and emotional way than she had ever done before. The evening continued with conversations that were deeper and more meaningful than any we had had before. It was evident that the changes in our relationship were solidifying into something lasting and real. We shared stories, laughed, and even discussed future collaborations where I could lend my expertise to community projects they were involved in. As I drove back to my apartment that night, the city lights blurred into streams of color. The emotional impact of the evening was overwhelming. For so long, I had fought for this level of acceptance and understanding from my family. Now that it was here, it felt both surreal and deeply satisfying. The journey from being overlooked to being celebrated had been long and fraught with challenges, but it had led to this newfound harmony. I realized that while my initial drive had been fueled by a need to prove myself, it had evolved into something much greater, a desire to make a difference, not just in my life, but in the lives of others. This transformation was not just about personal victory, it was about legacy. What began as a quest for recognition had grown into a mission to create lasting change. The scars of the past, while not forgotten, had been transformed into lessons of resilience and determination. As the new year began, the momentum from my recent successes propelled me into launching another ambitious project. This time, the focus was on educational reform, particularly targeting underserved communities. The idea was to bridge the gap between the opportunities available to children in these areas compared to those in more affluent parts of the city. My involvement in this project was not just as a consultant, but as a founder. I collaborated with educational experts, local leaders, and technology companies to create an integrated program that would offer not only traditional schooling, but also digital literacy, critical thinking skills, and access to global learning resources. The initiative quickly gained traction, attracting funding from major philanthropic organizations impressed by the results of the housing project. This new venture was more than a professional challenge. It was a personal mission. It mirrored my own journey from being marginalized to becoming a change maker, underscoring the transformative power of education and opportunity. The launch event was a vibrant affair, attended by community members, stakeholders, and even some political figures. Coverage in the media was overwhelmingly positive, highlighting the potential impact of the project on future generations. Meanwhile, at home, the changes in my relationship with my family deepened. The frequent interactions that had started with tentative steps were now regular and filled with genuine warmth. My sister and I developed a tradition of meeting every weekend, often brainstorming ways to leverage our respective skills for various charitable causes. These meetings were not just about planning. They were about bonding over shared values and visions for the future. My parents, too, were actively involved, occasionally volunteering in the initiatives I spearheaded. This involvement was a stark contrast to the past and served as a healing balm for old wounds. It was as if we were constructing a new family legacy, one built on mutual respect, collaboration, and a shared commitment to making a difference. As spring approached, I received an invitation to speak at an international conference on social entrepreneurship. The organizers wanted me to share my journey and the impact of my work, highlighting how individual initiative can drive systemic change. Accepting the invitation, I saw it as an opportunity to showcase not just my achievements, but also to inspire others to take action in their communities. Preparing for the conference, I reflected on everything that had transpired. The speech I drafted was deeply personal, weaving together the narrative of my family dynamics, the challenges I faced, and the victories we had achieved together. It was a story of transformation, not just of an individual, but of a family and a community. Standing on the international stage, I looked out at the audience, a diverse group of entrepreneurs, activists, and thought leaders from around the world. The lights were bright, the room filled with anticipation. I began my speech with a moment from my childhood, a seemingly small incident of inequality that had set the stage for everything that followed. As I recounted the stories of my projects, the strategies employed, and the successes achieved, I emphasized the role of resilience and determination. But more than that, I spoke of forgiveness and growth, how reconciling with my family had not only changed our personal relationships, but had also enhanced our collective impact on the world. The response was immediate and emotional. The audience connected not just with the scale of the achievements, but with the human element of my journey. After the session, many approached to share their own stories, drawing parallels and seeking advice on how to initiate similar changes in their environments. Returning home, I felt a sense of completion, as if a full circle had been drawn. The young girl who once felt overlooked and undervalued had now stood on an international platform, recognized not only for her professional excellence, but for her ability to transform personal pain into a powerful force for good. The final chapter of this story was not written in the accolades or the public recognition, but in quiet moments with my family. Redefined relationships built on newfound respect and shared purpose. We had all grown through this journey, learning that the true measure of success isn't just what you achieve for yourself, but how you uplift others along the way. As the sun set on a particularly reflective evening, I realized that my story, fraught with challenges and victories, was ultimately one of hope. A beacon for anyone who feels overshadowed or undervalued. A testament to the fact that with determination, resilience, and a willingness to forgive, it is possible to rewrite not just your story, but the stories of those around you.